The country king's surprise that made the whole world cry. George Strait turns Rejection into an unforgettable moment for his granddaughter. The morning sun cast long shadows across the wooden floor of the small dance studio on the outskirts of San Antonio, Texas, where 12-year-old Emma Wilson stretched her lean frame against the bar. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, revealing the determined expression that had become her trademark during these early morning practice sessions. While most kids her age were still buried under their covers, Emma had been here for an hour, perfecting the same sequence of movements she had been working on for months. The studio smelled of rosin and dreams, a combination that had become as familiar to Emma as the scent of her mother's morning coffee. Through the large windows she could see the sprawling Texas landscape that had shaped generations of her family, but Emma's eyes were always focused inward, on the reflection that stared back at her from the mirror-lined walls. She wasn't just any 12-year-old with big dreams. She was the granddaughter of George Strait, the man they called the king of country music. But that was precisely the problem. Emma had discovered her passion for dance at age 7, when her mother Jenny had enrolled her in a local ballet class, hoping to channel her daughter's boundless energy. From the very first plie, Emma knew she had found her calling. The way her body could tell stories without words, the way music could flow through her movements like water through a stream. It was magic in its purest form. But it wasn't the boot-stomping, guitar-strumming magic that had made her grandfather a legend. Her classmates at Roosevelt Middle School knew bits and pieces about her famous grandfather, but Emma had become masterful at deflecting questions and changing subjects. She had learned early that being George Strait's granddaughter came with expectations she had no interest in meeting. People expected her to strum a guitar, to wear cowboy boots, to have that distinctive Texas twang when she sang. Instead, Emma moved like liquid poetry across hardwood floors, her soul speaking fluent ballet, contemporary, and jazz. The irony wasn't lost on her that while her grandfather commanded stages in front of thousands of screaming fans, she found her peace in the solitude of an empty dance studio, where George Strait's voice could make grown men cry with tales of heartbreak and redemption. Emma's body could convey the same emotions through the arc of her spine and the extension of her arms. They were artists cut from the same cloth, just painting with different brushes. Every morning, as Emma practiced her routine for the upcoming Southwest Youth Dance Festival, she felt the weight of her secret pressing down on her shoulders like an invisible burden. The festival wasn't just any competition. It was the most prestigious youth dance event in Texas, attracting scouts from dance academies across the country. Winners had gone on to perform with major companies, and some had even made it to Broadway. For Emma, it represented everything she had worked toward, a chance to prove that her talent had nothing to do with her last name. The festival was scheduled for March 15th, her 13th birthday. Emma had convinced herself it was a sign from the universe, a cosmic alignment that would finally allow her to step out of her grandfather's shadow and into her own spotlight. She had been saving every penny from her allowance and occasional babysitting jobs to pay for the entry fee, the costume, and the professional coaching sessions that her dance teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had recommended. Mrs. Rodriguez, a former prima ballerina who had traded the bright lights of Houston's ballet company for the quiet satisfaction of teaching the next generation, had seen something special in Emma from day one. "You have something that cannot be taught, mija," she would often tell Emma, using the Spanish endearment that had become their special bond. "You have the ability to make people feel what you feel. That is a gift more precious than any famous name." The routine Emma had been perfecting was a contemporary piece set to an instrumental version of a song that had nothing to do with country music. It told the story of a young bird learning to fly, discovering that true freedom came not from following the flock, but from trusting her own wings. The choreography was ambitious for someone her age, incorporating elements of ballet, jazz, and contemporary dance that showcased the years of training Emma had poured into her craft. As Emma finished her morning practice session, beads of perspiration glistening on her forehead, she allowed herself a moment to imagine what it would feel like to take the stage at the festival. In her mind, she could see the judges' faces lighting up with surprise and admiration, recognizing talent that stood on its own merit. She could picture her mother in the audience, tears of pride streaming down her face, finally seeing her daughter achieve the recognition she deserved. But Emma's dreams were about to collide with a reality she had been trying to avoid her entire young life. The festival director, Victoria Lawson, was a woman whose own failed dreams of stardom had curdled into a bitter need to control and diminish others. Victoria had once been a promising dancer herself, making it as far as the chorus line in a few Broadway productions before an injury ended her career prematurely. Now she wielded her position at the festival like a weapon, particularly against children she perceived as having unfair advantages. Emma had no way of knowing that her name had already caught Victoria's attention during the application process. As the woman sat in her cluttered office reviewing files, she had paused at Emma's submission. The talent showcased in the audition video was undeniable. The girl moved with a maturity and emotional depth that belied her years. But it was the last name that made Victoria's jaw clench with resentment. Wilson, Victoria had muttered to herself, immediately connecting the dots to George Strait's family. In her twisted worldview, Emma represented everything she despised about the entertainment industry: privilege, connections, and opportunities handed down through bloodline rather than earned through struggle. Victoria had no intention of allowing another connected child to waltz into success, while genuinely talented but unknown kids were overlooked. Emma remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her as she continued her daily routine of school, practice, and preparation. Her group of 5 dancers had become more than teammates. They were sisters, bound by their shared dream and mutual support. There was Sophia, whose parents worked double shifts at a local restaurant to pay for her lessons. Maya, who rode her bike 6 miles to the studio because her family couldn't afford gas. Isabella, who had been dancing since she could walk but had never owned a new costume. And Carmen, whose natural grace masked the pain of a difficult home life. These girls looked up to Emma, not because of her famous grandfather, but because of her dedication and the way she pushed herself harder than anyone else in their group. Emma had become their unofficial leader, organizing extra practice sessions, helping with difficult moves, and even contributing her own saved money when one of the girls couldn't afford new dance shoes. The bond between the 5 girls had grown stronger as the festival approached. They spent hours together, not just practicing their routine, but sharing their dreams, fears, and hopes for the future. Emma found herself opening up to them about her struggles with her identity, though she still hadn't revealed the full extent of her famous connections. To them, she was simply Emma, the girl who could make a simple pirouette look like poetry, who remembered everyone's birthday, and who believed in their collective dream with an intensity that was both inspiring and infectious. As the days counted down to the festival, Emma's excitement was tempered by a growing anxiety she couldn't quite name. Something felt different in the air, a tension that seemed to follow her from the studio to school and back again. She noticed Victoria watching her more intently during practice sessions, making notes on a clipboard, with an expression that was hard to read but definitely not encouraging. The other participants' parents had started treating Emma differently too, though she wasn't sure why. Conversations would stop when she entered a room, and she caught several adults whispering while looking in her direction. Emma began to worry that her secret was slowly leaking out, threatening to overshadow the one thing she wanted to achieve purely on her own merit. Her mother Jenny had noticed the change in Emma's demeanor, but attributed it to pre-competition nerves. Jenny understood better than most the pressure of living in George Strait's shadow. She had spent her own childhood navigating the complexities of being the daughter of a country music icon. She had made the conscious decision to move to San Antonio and live a relatively quiet life, working as a music teacher at a local elementary school, allowing her daughter to grow up with as much normalcy as possible. George Strait himself had always respected his daughter's wish for privacy and rarely visited unannounced, understanding that his presence could turn any gathering into a media circus. But he loved Emma fiercely and had always been impressed by her artistic talents, even if they diverged dramatically from his own musical path. He had attended several of her smaller recitals over the years, sitting proudly in the back row, applauding with genuine enthusiasm for his granddaughter's graceful movements. Emma's relationship with her grandfather was built on quiet moments and shared understanding rather than public displays. They would spend hours together when he was home from touring, with Emma showing him her latest choreography while he played gentle melodies on his guitar. These sessions had taught Emma that artistry transcended genre. Whether it was country music or contemporary dance, the goal was always the same: to touch people's hearts and make them feel something real. But now, as the festival loomed just 2 weeks away, Emma could feel the walls of her carefully constructed separate world beginning to crumble. She had no idea that Victoria Lawson was already plotting to use her connection to George Strait against her, or that the next few days would test not only her dancing abilities, but also her strength of character in ways she had never imagined. The stage was set for a confrontation that would force Emma to choose between hiding from her heritage and embracing the complicated legacy that came with bearing the Strait name. What she didn't know was that sometimes the very thing you're running from becomes the key to unlocking everything you've ever wanted. As Emma packed her dance bag that evening, carefully folding the leotard she would wear to the next day's rehearsal, she whispered a small prayer to whoever might be listening. She didn't ask for victory or recognition. She simply asked for the chance to dance, to share the gift that burned so brightly inside her 12-year-old heart that sometimes she thought it might consume her entirely. Little did Emma know that her prayer was about to be answered in ways more extraordinary than her young imagination could possibly conceive, and that the journey ahead would transform not only her own life, but also touch the hearts of everyone who witnessed what was about to unfold. The imposing glass building that housed the Southwest Youth Dance Festival administrative offices gleamed under the harsh Texas sun as Emma and the other participants gathered for their mandatory orientation meeting. Victoria Lawson had insisted that all dancers and their parents attend this session, claiming it was essential for understanding the festival's elevated standards and expectations. The meeting room buzzed with nervous energy as dozens of young dancers fidgeted in their seats, their parents exchanging polite but competitive glances. Victoria entered the room like a storm cloud, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun that seemed to stretch her face into a permanent expression of disapproval. She wore all black, from her tailored blazer to her pointed-toe shoes, creating an intimidating silhouette against the white walls. Her eyes swept across the assembled families with the calculating precision of a predator sizing up prey. "Welcome to what I consider the most important dance competition in the Southwest," Victoria began, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to absolute control. "I want to make something crystal clear from the beginning. This festival is not a participation trophy event. We are here to identify genuine talent, not to coddle children who think dancing is merely a hobby." Emma felt her mother's hand gently squeeze her shoulder as Victoria continued her intimidating speech. The woman's words were sharp and cutting, designed to weed out what she called pretenders and dilettantes. As Victoria called out each participant's name for attendance, Emma noticed how the woman's tone shifted subtly with different surnames, becoming warmer for some families and noticeably cooler for others. "Emma Wilson," Victoria called out, her voice suddenly taking on a different quality that Emma couldn't quite identify. There was something in the way Victoria's eyes lingered on her face, a calculating look that made Emma's stomach twist with unease. "Present," Emma replied quietly, suddenly feeling like she was under a microscope. Victoria consulted her clipboard, then looked back at Emma with renewed interest. Wilson, she mused aloud, tapping her pen against her lips. "That's an interesting surname. Are you by any chance related to George Strait? I believe his family name was originally Wilson before the stage name." The room fell silent. Every head turned toward Emma, and she felt heat rushing to her cheeks as dozens of eyes focused on her. This was exactly the moment she had been dreading her entire life. Her mother, Jenny, sat rigid beside her, clearly caught off guard by the direct question in such a public setting. "Yes, Ma'am," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "He's my grandfather." The reaction was immediate and electric. Parents began whispering excitedly to each other, and several young dancers turned in their seats to stare at Emma with new interest. Some looked impressed, others seemed suddenly intimidated, and a few appeared resentful. Emma wanted to disappear into the floor. Victoria's smile was sharp as a knife's edge. "How fascinating," she said, drawing out each word. "The granddaughter of the king of country music wants to be a ballet dancer. How unexpected." The way she said "unexpected" made it sound like something distasteful. "Well, young lady," Victoria continued, her voice now carrying a tone of false sweetness that didn't reach her eyes, "I hope you understand that here we judge talent purely on merit. Your grandfather's fame won't help you execute a proper grand jeté or maintain your turnout during a difficult combination. In fact, I'll be watching you even more carefully to ensure you're not riding on anyone's coattails." Emma's heart sank as she realized the very thing she had tried so hard to avoid was now defining her in this room full of strangers. She could feel the weight of everyone's expectations shifting could practically hear the whispers that would follow her for the rest of the competition process. After the meeting, as families filed out of the building, Emma noticed how differently people treated her. Some parents approached Jenny with sudden friendliness, clearly hoping to leverage a connection to George Strait for their own purposes. Others pulled their children away, as if Emma's famous bloodline gave her some unfair advantage that made her dangerous competition. The ride home was quiet, with Jenny occasionally glancing at her daughter through the rearview mirror. Emma stared out the window at the familiar landscape, watching cattle graze peacefully in fields that stretched toward the horizon. She envied those animals their simple existence, free from the complications of legacy and expectation. "Mom," Emma finally said as they pulled into their driveway, "do you think I should drop out of the festival?" Jenny turned off the engine and twisted around to face her daughter. "Emma Wilson Strait," she said firmly, using Emma's full name, "you have been working toward this festival for months. You've sacrificed weekends with friends, given up countless hours of free time, and poured your heart into that routine. You're not dropping out because some bitter woman decided to make your life difficult." But Emma could see the worry in her mother's eyes, the same concern that had shadowed Jenny's own childhood when she had tried to forge her own identity separate from her famous father. The cycle was repeating itself, and both mother and daughter knew it. Over the next few days, Emma's experience at rehearsals changed dramatically. Victoria seemed to appear wherever Emma was practicing, clipboard in hand, making notes with an expression of barely concealed disdain. During group rehearsals, Victoria would stop Emma's routine repeatedly, citing technical flaws that other instructors had never mentioned. "Your port de bras lacks emotional authenticity," Victoria would announce loudly enough for other dancers to hear. "Perhaps you're too accustomed to having things handed to you to understand the real struggle that creates genuine artistry." Emma's dance partners, Sophia, Maya, Isabella, and Carmen, began to notice the unfair treatment their friend was receiving. They had known Emma for 2 years and had never seen her receive anything but praise for her technique and emotional expression. The girls formed a protective circle around Emma, offering encouragement and support, but they could all feel the toxic atmosphere Victoria was creating. Sophia, whose parents had emigrated from Mexico and worked tirelessly to afford her dance lessons, was particularly outraged by Victoria's implications. "Emma works harder than anyone here," she told the other girls during a break. "She's here before all of us and leaves after everyone else. If anything, she's trying to prove she deserves to be here more than the rest of us." Maya nodded vigorously. "I've never seen anyone practice the way Emma practices. She doesn't act like she thinks she's special because of her grandfather. Half the time I forget she's even related to him." The psychological pressure began to take its toll on Emma's performance. She started second-guessing movements that had become second nature, stumbling through combinations she could normally execute flawlessly. The more Victoria criticized her, the more tentative Emma became, creating a vicious cycle that seemed to validate Victoria's harsh assessments. 3 days before the festival, Victoria called a final meeting for Emma's group. The girls arrived at the studio with nervous excitement, expecting last-minute coaching and encouragement. Instead, they found Victoria standing center stage with an expression that could freeze fire. "I've made a difficult decision regarding our intermediate contemporary group," Victoria announced without preamble. "After careful consideration and observation, I've determined that one of our dancers isn't quite ready for the pressure of festival competition." Emma felt the world tilt on its axis as Victoria's eyes locked onto hers. The other girls instinctively moved closer to Emma, sensing what was coming. "Emma Wilson," Victoria continued, savoring each word like a predator playing with wounded prey, "will be moved to alternate status. You'll still attend the festival, of course, in case one of our primary dancers becomes unable to perform, but I feel it's in everyone's best interest, particularly yours, to reduce the pressure and allow you more time to develop your technique." The silence in the room was deafening. Sophia gasped audibly, while Maya's hands flew to cover her mouth in shock. Isabella and Carmen looked between Emma and Victoria with expressions of pure disbelief. Emma herself felt as if she had been punched in the stomach, all the air leaving her lungs at once. "But Miss Lawson," Sophia spoke up bravely, "Emma is our strongest dancer. Our routine was built around her movements. We can't perform it without her." Victoria's smile was cold as winter. "Then perhaps you should have encouraged her to focus more on technique and less on other distractions. I'm sure you can adapt. After all, great dancers are flexible." Emma found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "What distractions? I've done everything you asked. I've worked harder than anyone here." "Have you?" Victoria challenged, stepping closer to Emma with predatory intensity. "Or have you simply been coasting on the assumption that your family name would carry you through? This festival is about merit, young lady, not about who your grandfather happens to be." The accusation hit Emma like a physical blow. Everything she had tried to avoid, every stereotype she had worked to disprove, was being thrown in her face by the very person who held her dreams in her hands. Tears began to form in Emma's eyes, but she refused to let them fall in front of Victoria. "That's not fair," Carmen said, stepping forward to defend her friend. "Emma never talks about her grandfather. She never acts like she's better than us. She's the most humble person here." Victoria's expression hardened further. "Humble? Is that what you call it?" "I call it manipulation, making everyone feel sorry for the poor little rich girl who just wants to be treated like everyone else." Her voice dripped with sarcasm. "Well, congratulations, Emma. You're getting exactly what you asked for. You're being judged purely on merit, and you've been found and lacking." Emma couldn't hold back her tears any longer. They flowed silently down her cheeks as she gathered her things, her hands shaking with a combination of humiliation and devastation. Her four friends surrounded her, offering comfort and expressing their outrage, but their words felt distant and muffled, as if she were hearing them from underwater. As Emma walked toward the exit, Victoria called out one final crushing blow. "Perhaps it's time you considered following in your grandfather's footsteps instead. Country music might be more suitable for someone with your particular background." The drive home was a blur of tears and broken dreams. Emma sat in the passenger seat of her mother's car, staring at the Texas landscape that suddenly seemed foreign and unwelcoming. Everything she had worked for, every sacrifice she had made, every hour of practice she had dedicated to perfecting her craft, all of it had been dismissed and diminished by a woman who saw her not as an individual artist, but merely as an extension of her grandfather's fame. Jenny was furious, but tried to maintain her composure for Emma's sake. She had witnessed the same kind of prejudice during her own youth, when teachers and peers had either expected too much or too little of her because of her father's celebrity. She had hoped things would be different for Emma, that enough time had passed and enough distance had been created to allow her daughter to exist independently. That night, Emma lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, her festival costume hanging in her closet like a mockery of her shattered dreams. She could hear her mother on the phone in the next room, speaking in hushed, angry tones to someone, probably her grandmother or a close friend. Emma pulled her pillow over her head, trying to block out the sound of her mother's distress, knowing she was the cause of it. The festival was still happening. Her friends would still take the stage, but their carefully rehearsed routine would be incomplete without her. Emma realized that Victoria's cruelty extended beyond just hurting her. It was sabotaging four other innocent girls who had done nothing wrong except choose Emma as their teammate. As sleep finally began to claim her exhausted mind, Emma made a decision that surprised even herself. She wouldn't let Victoria Lawson destroy her friends' dreams, along with her own. Somehow, someway, she was going to find a way to make sure Sophia, Maya, Isabella, and Carmen got their moment to shine, even if it meant she had to watch from the sidelines as her own dreams crumbled to dust. The next morning brought no relief from the emotional turmoil that had consumed Emma's thoughts throughout the sleepless night. She moved through her daily routine like a ghost, mechanically eating breakfast, while her mother watched with growing concern. Jenny had seen this look before. It was the same expression she had worn during her own childhood, when the weight of being George Strait's daughter had threatened to crush her spirit. Emma insisted on attending the final group rehearsal, despite knowing she would only be watching from the sidelines. She couldn't abandon her friends, even though seeing them struggle to adapt their routine without her felt like watching someone tear pages from her diary. The choreography they had spent months perfecting was falling apart, and Emma could see the frustration and sadness in her teammates' faces. "This isn't right," Maya said during a water break, her usually cheerful demeanor replaced by righteous anger. "Emma, you have to tell your grandfather what's happening. Mrs. Lawson can't treat you like this just because she's jealous of your family." Emma shook her head firmly. "Grandpa George is in the middle of his tour. He's performing in Nashville tonight, then Phoenix tomorrow. I can't bother him with my problems." "This isn't just your problem," Isabella chimed in, her voice thick with emotion. "We're a team. What she did to you, she did to all of us. Carmen, who rarely spoke up but whose quiet wisdom often surprised everyone, said something that hit Emma like a revelation. Emma, what if this isn't about protecting your grandfather from your problems? What if it's about protecting yourself from his help, because you're afraid it proves Mrs. Lawson right? The truth of Carmen's words struck Emma in a way that made her breath catch. She had been so determined to succeed independently that she had never considered whether accepting help when facing genuine injustice was different from relying on privilege. But before she could process this revelation fully, their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Rodriguez, Emma's longtime dance teacher, appeared in the rehearsal room doorway with an expression Emma had never seen before. The usually gentle woman looked furious, her dark eyes flashing with an anger that seemed to radiate from her small frame. "Girls," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice tight with controlled rage, "I just heard about what happened yesterday. Emma, I need to speak with your mother immediately." Within an hour, Jenny was sitting in Mrs. Rodriguez's office, listening to a detailed account of Victoria Lawson's treatment of Emma and the completely unprofessional way the festival was being conducted. Mrs. Rodriguez had been teaching dance for 25 years and had never witnessed such blatant discrimination against a child. "Jenny," Mrs. Rodriguez said, leaning forward across her desk, "what that woman did to Emma wasn't just unfair. It was cruel and calculated. She targeted your daughter specifically because of who her grandfather is, and that's not just wrong. It's potentially illegal discrimination." Jenny felt her protective instincts flaring to life in a way they hadn't since Emma was a toddler. "What do you think I should do? Emma made me promise not to call her father because she wants to handle this herself, but she's just 12 years old. Sometimes protecting our children means making decisions they won't initially understand," Mrs. Rodriguez replied gently. "Emma has worked too hard and come too far to have her dreams destroyed by someone else's bitterness and jealousy." That evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Jenny sat in her kitchen holding her phone and staring at her father's contact information. She hadn't wanted to burden him during his tour, knowing how demanding his schedule was and how much he valued the few hours of rest he could steal between performances. But as she thought about Emma's tear-stained face and the devastation in her daughter's eyes, Jenny knew she had to act. George Strait was in his hotel room in Nashville, reviewing set lists for the next day's show when his phone rang. Seeing Jenny's name on the screen always brought a smile to his face, but something in her voice immediately told him this wasn't a routine check-in call. "Dad," Jenny began, her voice tight with emotion, "I'm sorry to call so late, but I need to tell you what happened to Emma today." As Jenny recounted the events at the festival meeting and Victoria's treatment of Emma, George's expression grew darker with each detail. He had spent his entire career dealing with industry politics and professional jealousy, but the idea that someone would target his granddaughter because of his success filled him with a rage he rarely allowed himself to feel. "She removed Emma from the group 3 days before the festival?" George asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "After months of preparation." "It gets worse, Dad," Jenny continued, then told him about Victoria's public humiliation tactics and her suggestion that Emma should pursue country music instead of dance. George Strait had built his reputation on being a gentleman, a man who handled conflicts with dignity and professionalism, but he was also a grandfather who had just learned that his beloved granddaughter was being psychologically tortured by an adult who was supposed to nurture young talent. "Jenny," George said after a long pause, "I need you to do something for me. Don't tell Emma I know about any of this yet. I need to think about the best way to handle this situation without making things worse for her." After hanging up with his daughter, George stared out his hotel window at the Nashville skyline, his mind racing with thoughts and emotions he rarely allowed to surface during tour season. He thought about Emma's face the last time he had seen her, glowing with excitement as she demonstrated a new dance combination for him. He remembered the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her dreams, the pure passion that reminded him of his own early days in music, when all that mattered was the art itself. George had always been protective of his family's privacy, understanding better than most how fame could complicate and corrupt the simple joys of life. He had watched Jenny struggle with her identity as his daughter, and he had hoped that enough time and distance had passed to allow Emma to pursue her own dreams without interference. But Victoria Lawson had shattered that hope with her cruelty and prejudice. Now George faced a dilemma that had no easy answers. If he intervened directly, He risked confirming Victoria's accusations about Emma receiving special treatment. If he did nothing, he would be allowing his granddaughter to suffer for crimes she had never committed. That night, George barely slept. He kept thinking about all the times Emma had visited him backstage at concerts, watching with fascination as he prepared for performances. She had never shown the slightest interest in following his musical path, but she had absorbed something else from those observations, an understanding of what it meant to give everything you had to your art. George had taught Emma that true artistry required courage, not just talent. He had shown her that the stage was a place where you revealed your soul to strangers and trusted them to handle it with care. Now someone was trying to convince his granddaughter that her soul wasn't worthy of that trust, and George Strait wasn't about to let that happen. The next morning, George made a series of phone calls that would change everything. His first call was to his tour manager, cancelling his Phoenix show despite the financial implications and disappointed fans. His second call was to his longtime friend and attorney, asking about the legal ramifications of what Victoria had done to Emma. His third call was to someone who owed him a significant favor, the owner of the Majestic Theatre in San Antonio, where the festival was scheduled to take place. But George's most important call was to Mrs. Rodriguez, whom Jenny had contacted on his behalf. During their conversation, George learned details about Emma's training and dedication that filled him with even more pride and determination. Mrs. Rodriguez painted a picture of a young girl who arrived early and stayed late, who helped struggling classmates without being asked, and who approached dance with the same perfectionist work ethic that had made George a legend in country music. Mr. Strait, Mrs. Rodriguez said near the end of their conversation, "Your granddaughter is the most naturally gifted young dancer I've encountered in my 25 years of teaching, but more importantly, she's a beautiful soul who deserves better than what she's receiving." George spent the rest of the day making arrangements that would have seemed impossible to anyone else. He contacted musicians, lighting technicians, and sound engineers. He reached out to connections in the dance world that most people didn't even know he had. By evening, a plan was forming that was audacious, risky, and completely unlike anything George Strait had ever attempted. Meanwhile, Emma went through the motions of her final day before the festival, helping her friends practice the modified routine they had been forced to create without her. She smiled and offered encouragement, but Jenny could see the light had gone out of her daughter's eyes. The passionate, driven young artist had been replaced by a polite, hollow version of herself. That evening, as Emma sat in her room supposedly working on homework, but actually staring blankly at her textbook, her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something compelled her to answer. "Emma, sweetheart, it's Grandpa George." Emma's heart leapt at the sound of his familiar voice, warm and reassuring, even through the phone's speaker. "Grandpa, aren't you supposed to be performing tonight?" "I was, but I had to cancel my show. I'm driving home to Texas right now because I heard about what happened at your festival meeting." Emma felt her stomach drop. "Mom told you." "Grandpa, I'm fine. You didn't need to cancel anything for me." George's chuckle was warm but determined. "Sweetheart, when someone hurts one of my family members, I don't consider anything more important than fixing that situation. Now I need you to listen carefully, because tomorrow is going to be a very special day, and I need you to trust me completely." Emma listened with growing amazement as her grandfather outlined a plan that seemed impossible, wonderful, and terrifying all at once. When he finished explaining, Emma was crying again, but this time they were tears of hope mixed with disbelief. "Grandpa," she whispered, "what if it doesn't work? What if people think I'm just using your fame after all?" "Emma Wilson Strait," George said, using the full name that always meant he was being serious. "Tomorrow isn't about me helping you, because you're my granddaughter. Tomorrow is about a grandfather standing up for justice when he sees his granddaughter being treated unfairly. There's a big difference, and anyone who can't see that isn't worth worrying about." As Emma hung up the phone, she felt something stirring in her chest that she hadn't felt since Victoria's devastating announcement. It wasn't just hope. It was anticipation, excitement, and a growing sense that tomorrow might bring something extraordinary that none of them could fully imagine. The morning of March 15th dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of brilliant Texas sky that seemed to promise miracles. Emma woke before her alarm, her stomach a tangle of nerves and excitement. Despite everything that had happened, today was still her 13th birthday, and somewhere deep inside, she clung to the childish belief that birthdays were inherently magical. Jenny had prepared Emma's favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes with real maple syrup, but Emma could barely manage more than a few bites. Her mind kept racing through the conversation with her grandfather, trying to understand exactly what he had planned. George had been deliberately vague about the details, asking only that Emma trust him and be ready for anything. "Mom," Emma said as she pushed her food around her plate, "what if Grandpa's plan makes everything worse? What if people think I'm just a spoiled kid who runs to her famous grandfather when things get difficult?" Jenny set down her coffee cup and studied her daughter's face. At 12, Emma already showed signs of the thoughtfulness and integrity that would define her character as an adult. "Emma, your grandfather has been dealing with people's assumptions and judgments for more than 30 years. If he says he has a plan to handle this situation, then he has thought through every possible consequence." The drive to the Majestic Theatre felt surreal. Emma sat in the passenger seat, wearing her festival costume under a warm jacket, a dance bag packed with shoes she wasn't sure she would get to wear. The familiar weight of her hair in its competition bun felt strange, knowing she might spend the entire day as just a spectator. When they arrived at the theatre, Emma was shocked by what she saw. The parking lot was completely full, with cars stretched down several blocks. This level of attendance was unprecedented for a youth dance festival, and Emma felt a flutter of suspicion about her grandfather's mysterious phone calls. Inside the theatre lobby, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Parents who had attended previous festivals were commenting on the unusually large crowd, and several people seemed to be looking around expectantly, as if waiting for something or someone to appear. Emma noticed several faces she didn't recognize, adults who carried themselves with the confident bearing of industry professionals. Victoria Lawson was in her element, commanding attention in the center of the lobby while wearing an elaborate black dress that seemed more appropriate for a Broadway opening than a youth competition. She was surrounded by what appeared to be local media representatives and important-looking adults with clipboards and expensive cameras. "This is highly unusual," Victoria was saying to a small group of parents who had gathered around her. "I've never seen this level of interest in our festival before. Perhaps word has gotten out about the exceptional quality of this year's participants." Emma exchanged glances with her friends, who had spotted her arrival and rushed over with expressions of nervous excitement. They looked beautiful in their matching costumes, but Emma could see the sadness behind their smiles. Their routine had been altered so drastically that it barely resembled the piece they had originally created together. "Emma," Sophia whispered urgently, "something weird is happening. There are people here with professional cameras, and I overheard someone talking about expecting a special guest." Before Emma could respond, the lights in the lobby began to dim, signaling that the competition was about to begin. As families filed into the theatre, Emma was amazed to see that every single seat was occupied. The Majestic Theatre, which normally hosted touring Broadway shows and major concerts, was packed to capacity for a youth dance festival. Emma and her mother found seats in the section designated for alternates and family members, several rows back from the stage. From this vantage point, Emma could see Victoria in the front row, speaking animatedly with the panel of judges while gesturing toward her clipboard with obvious satisfaction. The competition began with the youngest group, 6- and 7-year-olds, performing a cheerful routine about butterflies. Despite her own heartbreak, Emma found herself smiling at their innocent enthusiasm and obvious joy in performing. This was what dance was supposed to be about, pure expression and the simple pleasure of movement. As the evening progressed through different age groups and dance styles, Emma noticed something unusual. The audience was unusually engaged and responsive, applauding with genuine enthusiasm, rather than the polite acknowledgement typical of these events. Several times, she caught glimpses of people in the balcony sections who seemed to be operating professional recording equipment. When the Intermediate Contemporary Division was announced, the category that should have included Emma, Victoria took the stage with a microphone. She wore the satisfied expression of someone who felt she had successfully maintained the integrity of her competition. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria announced, her voice carrying clearly through the theatre's excellent sound system, "our Intermediate Contemporary group has been working exceptionally hard to prepare for tonight's performance. These 5 talented young ladies represent the dedication and artistry that make our festival so special." Emma watched as Sophia, Maya, Isabella, and Carmen took the stage, their faces showing a mixture of determination and sadness. They had worked so hard to modify their routine, but Emma could see in their positioning that something crucial was missing. The choreography had been built around 5 dancers, and no amount of adaptation could completely fill the void left by her absence. As the music began, Emma's heart broke watching her friends perform their truncated version of the routine they had all dreamed of presenting together. They danced beautifully, but the emotional core of the piece, the interplay between all 5 personalities that had made their original choreography so special, was lost. The audience applauded politely when the routine ended, but Emma could sense their confusion. The performance felt incomplete, and everyone seemed to recognize that something was missing, even if they couldn't identify exactly what. Victoria returned to the microphone, preparing to introduce the next group, when suddenly the theater's lights began to dim in a pattern that seemed far more sophisticated than the simple lighting changes used throughout the evening. A single spotlight appeared on the side of the stage, and a figure emerged from the wings that made the entire audience gasp in collective shock. George Strait walked onto the stage carrying his acoustic guitar, dressed simply in dark jeans and a white button-down shirt. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had commanded stages for decades, but there was something different about his presence tonight, something more personal and intimate than his usual concert demeanor. The audience erupted in stunned excitement, but George raised his hand gently, and the theater fell silent with a respect that spoke to his legendary status. Victoria stood frozen at her microphone, her face cycling through expressions of shock, confusion, and growing panic. "Good evening, everyone," George said, his voice carrying easily through the theater without amplification. "I apologize for the surprise, but I couldn't let tonight pass without being here for a very special reason." Emma felt her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. This was really happening. Her grandfather had somehow arranged to be here on her birthday in front of all these people, for reasons she was still trying to understand. "Tonight is my granddaughter's 13th birthday," George continued, his eyes finding Emma's face in the crowd and offering her a smile that conveyed more love and support than any words could express. "Emma Wilson is one of the most talented dancers I've ever had the privilege to watch, and she has taught me that artistry comes in many forms." Victoria took a step toward George, clearly trying to regain control of her event, but he continued speaking with the authority of someone accustomed to holding an audience's complete attention. "I learned yesterday that my granddaughter has been removed from tonight's competition because someone decided that her talent was somehow less valid because of who I am." George's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath the gentleness. "That's not just wrong, it's a betrayal of everything art is supposed to represent." The theater was so quiet that Emma could hear her own heartbeat. She looked around and saw faces filled with shock, outrage, and growing understanding of the injustice that had been done. "So tonight," George said, beginning to tune his guitar, "I'd like to invite Emma and her 4 teammates to perform their original routine the way it was meant to be performed. I've taken the liberty of adapting one of my songs to match their choreography, and if they'll have me, I'd be honored to provide the musical accompaniment for their dance." Emma felt like she was floating as her name was called, along with Sophia, Maya, Isabella, and Carmen. The 5 girls looked at each other with expressions of pure disbelief before making their way to the stage on trembling legs. Victoria had retreated to the wings, her face a mask of humiliation and rage. As Emma and her friends took their positions, George positioned himself upstage with his guitar, creating an intimate concert setting that transformed the entire theater. The lights dimmed to create the perfect atmosphere for their routine, and George began to play a hauntingly beautiful acoustic arrangement that perfectly matched the emotional arc of their choreography. "This song is called Finding Wings," George announced softly, "and it's dedicated to every young person who has the courage to chase their own dreams, even when the world tries to convince them they're not worthy." As the first notes filled the theater, Emma felt every doubt, every moment of humiliation, every tear she had shed over the past few days, transforming into pure artistic energy. This was her moment, not because of her grandfather's fame, but because he believed in her talent enough to put his own reputation on the line. The routine that followed was magic in its truest form. Emma and her friends danced with an emotional intensity that spoke of months of preparation, genuine friendship, and the triumph of artistic truth over petty politics. George's voice provided the perfect accompaniment, his legendary vocal control serving the dance rather than dominating it. Emma had never felt more alive than in those precious minutes on stage. Every movement flowed from a place deeper than technique. It came from her soul, her heart, and every dream she had ever dared to dream. When she executed the final sequence, a series of turns that culminated in a breathtaking leap that seemed to defy gravity, the entire theater held its collective breath. As the last notes of George's guitar faded into silence, the theater exploded into applause that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. People leaped to their feet as one, their ovation thundering through the space with an intensity that had never been heard at a youth dance festival. Emma and her friends stood center stage, holding hands and breathing heavily, while George moved to join them with tears glistening in his eyes. The standing ovation continued for what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 10 minutes. Emma could see faces in the audience openly weeping, including her mother Jenny, who was sobbing with pride and relief. Even some of the other contestants' parents, who had initially seemed resentful of Emma's family connection, were applauding with genuine enthusiasm for what they had just witnessed. Victoria Lawson remained in the wings, her face a mask of shock and humiliation. She had expected to assert her authority and put an entitled child in her place, but instead she had inadvertently created a moment of such pure artistic beauty that it would be talked about for years to come. As the applause finally began to die down, George took the microphone one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "what you just witnessed had nothing to do with my name or my career. What you saw was 5 young artists sharing their passion and dedication with all of you. That's what art is supposed to be. Honest, beautiful, and transformative." He looked directly at Emma as he continued, "My granddaughter has taught me something important tonight. Talent doesn't need permission from anyone to shine. It just needs courage and the support of people who believe in truth over politics." As Emma and her friends finally left the stage, they were surrounded by well-wishers and other competitors who seemed genuinely moved by what they had experienced. But Emma's attention was caught by a group of adults who had been sitting in the balcony section and were now making their way backstage with purposeful strides. The first woman to approach was elegant and sophisticated, with silver hair and kind eyes that sparkled with intelligence. She extended her hand to Emma with a warm smile. "Emma, my name is Catherine Montgomery, and I'm the admissions director for the Juilliard School of Dance in New York City." Emma's knees nearly buckled. Juilliard was the most prestigious dance academy in the world, the kind of place she had only dared dream about in her most ambitious moments. "What I witnessed on that stage tonight," Catherine continued, "was extraordinary. Not just your technical skill, which is impressive for someone your age, but your emotional maturity and ability to convey genuine feeling through movement. We would like to offer you a full scholarship to our summer intensive program, with the possibility of early admission to our pre-professional division." Before Emma could process this life-changing offer, a second woman stepped forward. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen from the Houston Ballet Academy," she said with equal warmth. "We've been following promising young talent throughout Texas, and your performance tonight was absolutely breathtaking. We'd like to offer you a complete scholarship for our year-round training program, including housing assistance if needed." Emma looked around in confusion, trying to understand how representatives from these prestigious institutions had ended up at a small regional festival in San Antonio. That's when she noticed her grandfather standing nearby with a knowing smile that explained everything. A third man, distinguished and wearing an expensive suit, introduced himself as Marcus Rivera from the American Ballet Theater's Youth Development Program. "Emma, your grandfather contacted us yesterday to make sure we had the opportunity to see you dance. He didn't ask us to give you anything you hadn't earned. He simply made sure we knew about your talent. What happened on that stage tonight earned you this recognition entirely on your own merit." Emma felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. 3 of the most respected dance institutions in the country were offering her opportunities that most dancers worked their entire lives to achieve. But more importantly, they were offering these opportunities based on what they had witnessed tonight, not because of who her grandfather was. George approached his granddaughter and gently placed his hands on her shoulders. "Emma," he said softly, "I want you to understand something very important. I didn't ask these people to come here because I thought you needed my help to succeed. I asked them to come because I knew you deserved to be seen by people who could recognize and nurture your talent." Tears streamed down Emma's face as she hugged her grandfather tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for believing in me." "I've always believed in you," George replied. "Tonight was just about making sure the right people got to see what I've known all along." Sophia, Maya, Isabella, and Carmen were experiencing their own miraculous moments. Each of them had been approached by representatives from respected dance programs, their scholarships and opportunities flowing from the incredible performance they had just delivered. Their unity as a group, their obvious friendship and mutual support, had impressed the talent scouts as much as their individual skills. As the festival continued with other age groups, Emma and her friends found themselves the center of attention in the best possible way. They were surrounded by genuine admirers, other young dancers who wanted to know about their training, their friendship, and their artistic process. The focus was entirely on their craft and dedication, with Emma's famous grandfather mentioned only as a proud family member who had supported her passion. Victoria Lawson made one final attempt to insert herself into the evening's narrative, approaching George with what appeared to be an apology. But George handled the interaction with the same grace he had shown throughout the evening, accepting her words, while making it clear that his primary concern was his granddaughter's well-being, not settling scores with adults who should have known better. As the official competition concluded and families began to leave the theater, George made one final announcement that took everyone by surprise. "Before you all head home," he said from the stage, "I'd like to invite everyone to join us for a birthday celebration at the community center next door. We've arranged a small party to celebrate not just Emma's 13th birthday, but all the talented young artists who performed tonight." The community center had been transformed into a magical party space with decorations that celebrated both Emma's birthday and the achievements of all the festival participants. There were tables laden with Emma's favorite foods, a DJ playing a mix of contemporary and country music that somehow worked perfectly together, and a dance floor where young performers could continue celebrating their art in a relaxed, joyful atmosphere. Emma moved through the party in a state of amazed gratitude, accepting congratulations and birthday wishes from people who had witnessed her triumph over adversity. Her four best friends stayed close by her side, all of them still processing the extraordinary turn their lives had taken in the span of a few hours. The most magical moment came when George took the makeshift stage in the community center and performed an acoustic version of "Finding Wings," the song he had adapted for Emma's routine. As he sang, Emma and her friends performed a simplified version of their choreography, this time purely for joy rather than competition. The sight of the king of country music serenading his granddaughter while she danced with her best friends created a scene of such pure love and artistic celebration that many of the adults in attendance were moved to tears once again. It was a perfect fusion of two different artistic worlds, connected by family love and mutual respect for each other's gifts. As the evening wound down, Emma found herself sitting on a quiet balcony overlooking the San Antonio skyline, her grandfather beside her as they shared a piece of birthday cake. The city lights twinkled below them like earthbound stars, and Emma felt a peace she had never experienced before. "Grandpa," she said, taking a bite of the chocolate cake that had somehow appeared as if by magic, "how did you know everything would work out like this?" George chuckled, the sound warm and familiar in the cool night air. "I didn't know, sweetheart, but I knew that your talent was real, and I knew that when real talent meets real opportunity, beautiful things happen. Sometimes you just have to have faith and be willing to take a chance on what's right." Emma nodded, understanding dawning in her young mind. "You didn't save me tonight, did you? You just made sure I had the chance to save myself." "That's exactly right," George said, pride evident in his voice. "You and your friends saved yourselves by being true to your art and never giving up, even when someone tried to convince you that you weren't worthy." As Emma looked out over the city where she had grown up, she realized that she no longer felt the need to hide from her family's legacy. Being George Strait's granddaughter didn't diminish her achievements. It was simply one part of a much larger story that was still being written. The scholarship offers would need to be carefully considered with her mother and grandfather, but for tonight, Emma was content to sit beside the man who had taught her that true artistry required courage, integrity, and the willingness to stand up for what was right. She had learned that heritage wasn't something to run from or apologize for. It was something to honor by living up to the best values it represented. As the party continued inside, Emma smiled as she watched through the windows. Her friends were laughing and dancing freely, their dreams no longer threatened but expanded beyond anything they had imagined possible. Victoria Lawson had intended to teach Emma a lesson about knowing her place, but instead, She had inadvertently created a night that proved talent, determination, and family love could overcome any obstacle. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and decisions about Emma's future, but tonight belonged to the magic that happened when a grandfather's love met his granddaughter's courage, creating something beautiful enough to change not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone who witnessed it.